Hello everyone, this is Zooc and today I'm bringing you a new cooking video. This is going to be some cheesy as fuck mac and cheese. I'm doing some more American dishes because it's something that I've developed a passion for, I would say. And mac and cheese is one of those simple things that a lot of people don't really do at home, especially in the States. And for this reason, my relationship with mac and cheese has always been kind of troubled because when I first went to the States, I saw shelves upon shelves in supermarkets filled with boxed mac and cheese. And to me, boxed foods are kind of like, I look upon them with disdain. And mac and cheese is probably one of the most prominent boxed foods you can find in the States. Not so much in Europe, it's not that popular over here, which is quite interesting considering it's a dish of English origin, and England is in Europe. But yeah, in America, it's quite popular, especially with the kids, because it's like cheesy and pasta, and they love that shit. But yeah, when I first went over there, I didn't really like it. Probably because I only had the boxed versions, and of course that didn't really impress me much. But I started experimenting with it at home because I discovered that there are some gourmet possibilities, and it's one of those things that if you get right at home, you never ever need to buy a boxed package or powder or any sort of instant nonsense ever again. Mac and cheese is seen as a comfort food in North America, and by comfort I understand that if you eat enough of it, you'll probably not be able to get out of your chair or bed at some point, and you'll be very comfortable, forever, or until you get bariatric surgery, whichever the case. So yes, mac and cheese, quite delicious, very simple, but it's based on a bechamel sauce, which is, again, it sounds scary to people that don't cook, but I'm going to get into how simple that whole thing is in just a second. Now let's talk a bit about the history of the dish itself. Even though it is a popular modern thing in America, the dish is actually pretty old. It's as old as the 14th century, when it was encountered in like the oldest existing cookbook out there. And it was popularized in North America when one of the founding fathers, namely Thomas Jefferson, encountered this particular dish of pasta and cheese. Not exactly the modern form of it, but a more rudimentary form. While traveling through Paris and also northern Italy. So he really enjoyed that stuff, so he brought a machine over to the States and tried to create his own version of it, which wasn't really appreciated at first, but it became eventually a staple in American cookbooks. And it started with the Virginia Housewife, one of the most earliest American cookbooks and one of the most well-known ones, which was first published in 1824. And from that point on, every single company that deals in food manufacturing probably has a version of mac and cheese now on the shelf. So let's start. What you're gonna need, well, I'm not really actually gonna tell you quantities for this recipe because it's one of those things that I've practiced over and over and over that I don't really need any sort of precise quantities. And to be honest, I actually hate cooking with precise measuring. Not because I'm lazy or anything. For certain things, I will measure to the 10th of a gram. But for this particular dish, you really don't need to. And if you don't know how to cook or you're new to it, it's better to learn this way than read a recipe and learn the numbers. The numbers don't really help you. It's mostly about seeing, feeling, and tasting. Cooking from the heart, as corny as it sounds. But it's true. So what I'm going to start with is preheating my oven to 175 degrees Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit, because this is a baked mac and cheese with a breadcrumb topping. There are different versions of it. One is a stovetop mac and cheese with no topping, which is quite simple, and the other one is the baked one, which let's say is a bit more complicated one, but not really. It's just as easy. So preheat your oven to 350 and then boil some water. Sounds easy enough so far. After to the water, you need to add a lot of salt, and some recipes and some chefs will say that you need a bajillion liters of water to boil a handful of pasta, but it's really not true. What you need is enough water for the pasta to not float to the surface or be super crowded in there, and that's all. So put some water on high heat, put some salt or some seasoning powder in there, boil the water, put the pasta in, check the packaging and see how long it's supposed to take, and leave it for 1 minute less than that. That's kind of a general rule when cooking pasta. You don't want to cook what it says on the box. You want to do for 1 minute less, then taste it. And if it needs more, if it has a hard, opaque thing in the middle, like a little uncooked dough or whatever it is, then leave it for a 30-second more or about 1 minute more. And once the pasta is cooked, you drain the pasta and you mix it with about a pat of butter so it doesn't stick together, because once the water evaporates from the pasta, all the starches get really sticky, and the pasta will stick together into one solid piece. Not good. So just swish a bit of butter around and they'll stay relatively separated. Now, mac and cheese, the actual cheese sauce is based on a bechamel sauce. The bechamel sauce is one of the 5 mother sauces in traditional French cooking. It was first mentioned by a French chef called Marie-Antoine Carême, who was born in the late 1700s. And he is responsible for creating hundreds of sauces, but he created 4 major categories, which were later taken over by another French chef called Auguste Escoffier. His name will come up in he's like the authority on a lot of the cooking principles of French cooking. And he was also born in the 19th century. He published a book called Le Guide Culinaire in 1903, which is the culinary guide, in which he took Carême's 4 sauces and added a 5th one. But bechamel has always been part of the 4 or the 5 core sauces. There are 5 core sauces because you can add different ingredients to each of them or combine them separately or between each other to create endless variations of sauces. So these are the 5 bases, really. So a bechamel sauce is nothing but a mixture of flour, a fat, and which constitutes a roux, as you might have heard before, and some form of liquid, preferably dairy. So milk, half and half, heavy cream, or any combination thereof. You can even add water if you so want, but I would probably not recommend that for this particular situation. So to make a roux, this is the easiest shit in the world. I don't know why people fear this. Put a pot on medium-low heat. Melt about, for this quantity of pasta, I used about 400 grams of dried pasta. And I have about 400 grams of cheese. So I'm going to use about, I would say, 50 to 60 grams of butter and an equal quantity by weight of flour. But I'm eyeballing it here because I don't need to measure for this recipe anymore. So I'm just adding 1/3 of a cup of flour after the butter has melted. And you mix that and you cook that. It's got to be whisked constantly for about 2 minutes until the taste of the raw flour cooks out. And you got like a pale blonde roux going on. You got to be careful not to let it stick because it easily burns. But if you keep mixing on medium-low heat, that won't happen. So it'll just cook nicely and bubble away. So what you need to add to that after that is cold milk. Now some people say add hot milk and you'll get no lumps. Other people say add cold milk and you'll get no lumps. Clearly, lumps aren't that much of an encountered thing because, to be honest, even in my early days of experimenting with roux and bechamel sauce, I never actually got any lumps in anything. And I got an interesting anecdote about that. When I was working at the restaurant, when I was doing my cooking school internship, some of the chefs that worked there asked me to make a bechamel sauce. And I started doing it the way I knew it. So I put a pot on the fire and I melted a pack of butter and put it in the flour. And they were sitting there stunned, like, what are you doing, man? What am I doing? What you asked me? I'm making a bechamel sauce. And they said, like, wow, you actually do it the traditional way. Like, we just use a blender and we pour everything in the pot at the same time and just blend it until it's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? You fucking idiots. It is literally the easiest thing in the world to make a bechamel sauce. So once the flour and the butter have cooked, you add the cold milk. I've always added cold milk. It always works for me, so no reason to change it. You add the cold milk a little bit at a time, incorporate it. Initially, the roux, which seems kind of pasty and liquidy, will harden up and become tougher when you add the milk in because the starch gelatinizes and expands when you add that. Just keep adding milk a little bit at a time and mixing constantly, whisking until you get something creamy looking and thick. And once that happens, it's smooth sailing from that point on. That's it, basically. You'll have no lumps, no problems, nothing. So just keep adding milk until you get a relatively thin sauce. I generally stick to the thinner side because once you start adding the cheese, that shit will thicken up. The role of this sauce is to stabilize the cheese and have a base to melt the cheese in, because if you just melt cheese in the microwave, it'll just separate into a greasy mess. So to the sauce, I add 2 teaspoons of paprika, a fuck ton of salt. This sauce in particular needs quite a bit of salt. And the way to tell how much salt is enough is to just taste it, really. So if you think that you could eat it with a spoon as it is, and it's not bland, then it's ready. It's good. because once you add the cheese, it'll become even saltier. Sometimes I tend to add a little less salt, but it really depends on individual taste, because whenever I make something for my mother and I give her a taste of it, the first words to come out of her mouth are, it needs more salt, while for me, it doesn't. So I don't need that much salt, but it really depends. If you're a smoker, if you just don't have such receptive taste buds, you'll probably need more salt, but just try it a little bit at a time. It's fine if you taste the sauce 100 times, as long as you don't eat the whole damn thing. So 2 teaspoons of paprika, and what I also add is about a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. Generally, you can add mustard powder if you have it, but I don't have it here in Prague, so I'm just using Dijon, and quite honestly, I like the little tang and the taste that it gives, and that little bit of spiciness. It works with the cheese. And I'm also adding some freshly grated nutmeg. A bechamel sauce generally has nutmeg in it, and it just gives it a little bit of extra flavor. Always grind your own nutmeg. That's a recommendation I cannot state enough times. Pre-ground nutmeg is kind of garbage. So just get a little thing or two of nutmeg. It'll last you for a long time, and just grate it fresh every time you need it. Seriously, it's really cool. So once that's done, then you start adding the cheese, also on medium-low heat. Some recipes will say that you need to add the cheese off heat, but to be honest, I've never had a reason to, because it never burned and it never stuck to the pot, and it's always been fine. So what I have there is about 200 grams of Gruyere, which is a Swiss cheese, a hard Swiss cheese, kind of stinky, not with any mold or anything, it just smells very pungent. And also 200 grams of grated orange cheddar. Now, as an American, you have it easy because you have so many kinds of cheddar over there, extra sharp, medium, mild, whatever. I would probably go for the sharp one combined with the Gruyere. That'll make for a pretty good taste. You need that tanginess, the sharpness from the cheese to cut through the richness of the sauce, because the sauce tastes like very nauseating on its own. So it needs the sharpness of the cheese. If you don't have Gruyere, you could probably use Jarlsberg, even Fontina, maybe Provolone, if you have access to that. But Gruyere should generally be easily accessible in most European countries, especially in America. Everything. They have everything. You don't need anything. We Europeans have it pretty hard over here trying to find the same stuff that you guys have access to. So the cheddar, I have no idea what kind of cheddar this is, but it tastes kind of okay. You could probably use English cheddar, which is not as yellow as this, but I prefer the dark yellow one or the orange one for the color, and it tastes quite okay most of the time. So you start adding that handfuls at a time, whisking, constantly incorporating it until you add almost all the cheese. I would save a couple of handfuls because I'm going to layer it later on. So once you add all the cheese, you can keep it for a little while on low heat, but you should probably taste it about now and see if it needs extra seasoning or extra anything like that. Ways to spice this up. This sauce. Not many in my opinion, but of course you can add sriracha if you want to. You can be an overall terrible person like Total Biscuit and add garlic to it if you want. But I wouldn't do that. I hate that. It's a horror story for me. Honestly, while I lived with him there, I saw him do some terrible things to food, which I would not recommend to anyone to do. So don't add garlic, but just know that you can. You have that option, but you'll be shunned from your society if you do that. I'm kind of a purist when it comes to this stuff. I prefer the simple taste of cheese for mac and cheese. No crazy shit. So once the sauce is done, remove it from heat and just grab a 9x13 inch baking dish. Grease it up with butter. Pour half the macaroni in. Separate it with a spatula. Pour half the sauce in and just mix it up to form a cohesive layer. And then sprinkle half the cheese that's left, the grated cheese. And then in the pot where you still have the sauce left, mix in the other half of the macaroni and pour that over the cheese. Pour the rest of the cheese, or sprinkle the rest of the cheese on top. And what I'm going to do now is grab a couple of handfuls of parmesan, grated on a fine grater. Mix it with about 3 handfuls of breadcrumbs, which I made myself. Recommended here are Panko breadcrumbs, not the finely ground breadcrumbs that you tend to find in stores. Those are pretty shit. Go for Panko. Or just make your own. Cut some bread, white bread in thin slices, dry it out in an oven at a low temperature for like 20 minutes or so, and just put it in a food processor and you have Panko breadcrumbs. Super easy to do. And about 3-4 tablespoons of melted butter. Mix that all in with a fork until it resembles like wet sand, I guess. Sprinkle it on top of the cheese and pop that in the oven at 350 for about 15 minutes until the top is a nice golden brown and the cheese has melted on top and it's like kind of a solidified crust. So yeah, I realized this dish is like extremely fattening, very bad, but it's one of those simple but very delicious things that you can have. Seriously, every time I made this dish, both in the States and here, it was gone. Completely eaten, devoured. It's really good. And it changed my perspective on mac and cheese because I always, as I said in the beginning, I always kind of disliked it because I saw it's a very commercial thing. But if you take the time and the effort to do it at home properly, it can truly be a gourmet dish. Now, more ways to make this interesting. If you appreciate that heart attack flavor, you can add some crumbled bacon to the topping. That can also work. Or if you just want some meat in there, diced cooked ham works very well. Just add it straight to the cheese sauce and mix that with the pasta. But again, I prefer to just leave it as it is because I think it's totally fine and does not need anything else. Before you put the breadcrumb topping, you can also just give it a dash of pepper again, or some more paprika or some more salt if you think it needs it, or just anything that you think you would like on there. Maybe even some more grated nutmeg, anything. Just trap it there under the breadcrumbs and bake it and it's done. That's all there is to it. So this is going to be some cheesy as fuck mac and cheese, but trust me, it's really good. And I know Europeans don't have the mac and cheese culture. And I beg of you, Romanians, if you're watching this, do not use that dreaded monstrosity called cașcaval for this shit. We have a type of cheese back home, locally made, which sort of resembles cheddar, tastes nothing like it, is really bad at melting, separates into a greasy mess if you melt it, and has a very distinct taste that's not really good, I think, but some people like it for sandwiches. So don't use that. Just go ahead and get some cheddar and some Gruyere. Spend that extra money if you want to make this. Do not use local ingredients. Use the foreign stuff. It's worth it. So yeah, that's going to be it for now. Thank you for watching. Please rate that shit if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys for my next video. It's probably going to be something sweet this time. Yeah, it's going to be something sweet and something awesome. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.